America has missed the boat on animation. In the past few years, we've seen such a steep disregard for it as a viable storytelling medium that anything attempting to push beyond kid fare only falls prey to either juvenile excess or formulaic fettering. Some of the only interesting experimentation has been relegated to television and aimed primarily at children. This, and such things like Pixar's most recent output, can be defined as kids' stuff that adults can enjoy too. This isn't good enough. If one art form such as live-action film can be enjoyed and tackle any subject, then animation has just the same right to the occasional exclusion of one audience or another. Take, for example, the 2014 Academy Awards, a ceremony which, with each passing year, loses more and more of its already tenuous credibility, in which up for nomination were Frozen, The Croods, Despicable Me 2, Ernest and Celestine, and The Wind Rises. Almost inevitably, Frozen won, and when you look at quotes by these Academy member voters, 7 of which abstained, it becomes clear why. Such statements like this are indicative of the infuriatingly ignorant attitude held towards animation. To them, having to watch the nominees is akin to going to see your kid's school play. Yet if any of the ones who actually voted had watched all of the films, like one of them claimed to have done, there would have been no contest.
No surprise that animation
is Hollywood's most successful and innovative
genre.
Best animated film, and in my opinion, best film period of that year was Hayao Miyazaki's The Wind Rises. It is 100 times more intelligent, empowering, and inspiring than one of the voters' claims Frozen incontestably was. Even in 2015, some votes were being cast based on which films their kids wanted to see, or simply because Disney. When a film like The Wind Rises, which exhibits far better and more interesting characters, ideas, visual storytelling, and music than most anything released in Hollywood, animated or not, loses to something like Frozen, it becomes clear to me that the American film industry and film audiences in general simply do not want outstanding animated films. The stories and characters may be becoming more rich in recent years, but it's all under the acquiescing garb of children's fare. Why this negativity? After all, at The Cinematography, we try not to sow the seeds of vitriol and hatred the internet thrives on. Yet this is a serious problem for the arts, and for artists who truly care about the medium of animation. And also, championing less celebrated films is what we're good at. So what in the world does this have to do with the Royal Space Force? Well, with the previously discussed microcephalic climate towards what animation can be, is it any wonder that this film is not more widely discussed as a masterpiece of the medium? And even among anime fans, who would supposedly champion this film, criticisms are launched at it with the same narrow-mindedness which plagues the American Disney-saturated variant of the industry. An industry they would sooner criticize for the redundancy they themselves have fallen into. In 1981, when Daikon 3 had premiered, and this constellation of exuberant youngsters charted their way into the anime industry, it may have appeared that they were going to simply produce homage after homage. As many references and characters that the Daikon opening films are packed with, the team that would become Gainax, at least Toshio Okada, the Ota King, saw that they contributed new and iconic characters, not just giving endless tribute. In fact, back in the day, Okada and others among them were well read in SF literature, not just film and television, which helped inform more interesting concepts. They leapfrogged from the success gained by their films and were able to move forward with original film ventures, while at the same time slaving away selling merchandise through the general products store. Yet even in 1983, right after the release of Daikon 4, Royal Space Force was being planned. Shigeru Watanabe, who worked for Bandai, convinced the company to go into the new format of OVA, original video animation, for the home market. Therefore, Royal Space Force was first thought of being a half-hour OVA. The film was written and directed by Hiroyuki Yamaga, and though this would be his only time directing, he's known for also writing the superb Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket OVA. He wrote the film with young people in mind, but ironically set it in a realistic world, not something more escapist like those found in a Miyazaki film. Speaking of Miyazaki, an interview between the latter and Yamaga took place in Kinema Junpo magazine just prior to the film's release, in which the co-founder of Ghibli said, "I felt really good because it was an honest work without any bluff or pretension. It will stimulate the young people." Though there would be many spectacular scenes to showcase the animation talents of Gainax, the film was a totally original concept, from story through production. It wasn't based on a manga, novel, television show, or other pre-existing property. Therein lay the risk of such an expensive film, even in such an environment as Japan in the 1980s. It goes without saying that the film has some truly amazing animation. It's an institution in that regard. My first exposure to the film was through showcases of the exemplary effects work in AMVs and the like. The most outstanding work in the film is, in fact, the special effects animation, supervised mostly by Hideaki Anno. The man is a workhorse, and the Royal Space Force proved to hone his skills to near perfection. Not to forget the fine character animation work seen throughout the film. A lot of scenes are enhanced by some subtle movements and change of emotion enacted by these characters. However, what the film is renowned for is the sequence at the climax wherein a full-on aerial and ground assault takes place around the launch pad of a rocket. The incredible sense of weight seen in a falling airplane or the painstaking infernos rendered on the cells of explosions make this sequence a work of art in its own right. Not the least of the most impressive things are the careful camera movements that enhance the impact of the animation. When the plane hits the ground, the camera bobs a bit. There is a three-dimensional rotation around the downed jet to vertiginous effect. This shows an attempt to mimic reality, but the reality of live-action photography, especially when one looks at actual footage from fighter planes. It should be said, however, that this attention to realistic detail does not overstay its welcome. This was in a time before the compulsive desire in anime, and cinema in general, to add a camera shake every time something hits, explodes, or whizzes by the camera. With this film, they understood the right amount of verisimilitude needed. The rocket launch would have lost some of its impact if the camera was shaking while we were up close, while it was taking off. There's only that emphasis where it needs to be. I'd like to point that out as a lesson to today's live-action movies especially, who seem to not know when to tone it down, where everything apparently needs to have a documentary realism even if it makes no sense, because at this point it's becoming meaningless, vulgar, and just plain dumb. Anyway, Anno's efforts in the scene are truly staggering when we see shards of ice falling off the rocket, each one numbered and animated by him. The shots have layers upon layers of movement. Different objects have different timing in the same shot. It is true that the main creative team on the film went to visit NASA and watched the launching of the shuttle Discovery, and as legend goes, enjoyed Big Macs and Robotech in their hotel room. Lest I fail to talk about the astounding production design coordinated by art director Hiromasa Ogura, it may be one of the greatest attempts at conceiving an alternate world ever put on film. These designs numbered in the thousands. It's very functional, it's all plausible. Things like chairs and money are reinvented. One of the chief design goals was to take some familiar object and really take a step back asking, what is a chair or an aircraft? Many of the inspirations for these designs were taken from Western aesthetics of the early 20th century, along with some injection of Native American influence. The uniformity of these concepts is brought to life in paint and celluloid, and this unity is felt throughout the film. Not to mention, many of those working on the film had little to no experience in the industry prior. They were fans who were now given the chance to make something out of that fervor. In one bit of good fortune for the production, Gainax was able to get Ryuichi Sakamoto, who had not yet won his Oscar for Best Score for The Last Emperor, released the same year. I want to say that most of the score is good, which it is, but a big chunk of it honestly does not do enough service to the scenes they play in. This is because Sakamoto did not score the entire film. He produced the score, but only arranged less than half the cues. Others were made with fellow musicians. If anything I truly fault the film for, it would be how in specific scenes the emotional impact is hamstrung by the use of weak synthesizer accompaniment, such as the funeral scene. Even back then, synthesizers were used as a matter of style and fashion, but always took a backseat to either more sophisticated forms like with Vangelis, or full symphonic scoring. With this film, the truly outstanding pieces are the ones that Sakamoto composed and arranged, such as the opening and closing themes, Requini's motif, and the finale. It's pretty evident which are the stronger pieces. The story entails the rise of Shirotsu Ladat, an aimless volunteer of the titular Royal Space Force, which founders on the brink of bankruptcy while attempting to put the first man in space. One night, Shiro meets a young woman who gives him a flyer. He comes to her house and meets Requini, a religious girl, and her daughter. From her, Shiro comes to learn higher values and begins to see his world differently. His training and the rocket's construction proceed, while political conspiracies move around them. This all culminates in a fantastic climax, and in the end, though they cannot fully understand one another, Shiro takes Requeenie's ideals with him. I have screened this film for audiences no less than 3 times, and every single time, without fail, one scene proves to elicit a verbal response from at least a couple people in the room. You'll know what I'm referring to if you've seen the film, and if you haven't, I'll give some context. At this point in the film, Shiro is disillusioned with those he is working for, and his position in society. He walks away from his responsibilities and goes to stay with Requeenie at a church her and her daughter room at, following the destruction of their house. Shiro lies on the floor, his countenance low. Requeenie tries to show him some kindness, but it seems to do no good.
お前たちの真実は口から出れば偽りに変わり、お前たちの良き心は手に伝われば悪事をなす。お前たちにとって良いことが神にとって良いこととは限らない。祈ること以外、お前たちに何ができるというのか。祈りは小さな点であり。
While Requeenie reads to Mana, her daughter, Shiro stares forward, noticing her legs. When she goes behind a screen to change, Shiro gets up and proceeds to attempt to rape her. Shiro almost goes through with it, except that the sight of Requeenie's eyes makes him come to his senses, just before she knocks him out with a candelabra. Immediately afterwards, we see the next morning where Shiro, attempting to apologize, is baffled by Requeenie's insistent that she is the one who should apologize.
ごめん、すまなかった。悪かった、許してくれ。
でもあなたは何もなさらなかったわ。
いや、できなかったんだよ。
ごめんなさい。私どうかしてたんです。あなたのような立派な方を殴ってしまうなんて。まさか当たるとは思わなかったんです。お怪我ありませんでした？
いやいや、そんなことじゃ。
いいえ、あなたが許してくださるのは分かっています。でも、私にとっては許されないことです。
And if you were watching this with a group of people, now is where you'd hear shouts of confusion and anger. This scene is something like a black eye to many would-be admirers of the film. Reviewers who say this film is one scene short of a masterpiece would fail to see the point if they stabbed their eye with a pencil. Many critics seem to be so uptight and insecure that they have to bemoan some lost potential, as if they're afraid embracing the film, warts and all, would give people the impression that they condone rape. This is childish. Shiro and Requeenie are both two people at polar opposites of living. Their lifestyles cannot coexist, though they try.
だけど俺、読むときは君と一緒の方がいいな。
However, Shiro quickly sees what he is doing is wrong and stops. The sort of outrage that occurs with people really comes from the next scene, when Requeenie acts like she did something wrong. Yeah, this is confusing the first time you see it. This sort of response is not supposed to sit well with you. It is supposed to make you question the motives of the characters. Requeenie has put up with much hardship in her life, and at this point takes things in stride. Shiro, on the other hand, discovers Requeenie's passivity, and does indeed try to take advantage of it by trying to rape her. While we're on the subject, let's assail a similar scene in the sacred cow, or should I say sheep, of science fiction cinema, Blade Runner. Carl Gustav Horn, in the 25th anniversary fanzine for Royal Space Force, brings up a good point. Why doesn't the scene where Deckard practically assaults Rachel get more attention as morally distressing? Probably because the characters in the film are operating on different motivations, with Deckard attempting to jog Rachel's memory. Also, the music in a scene can sometimes mask the basic truth of what we're seeing. On the other hand, Royal Space Force has no music in this scene, and the intent of the moment is pretty clear. One other reason would have to be as simple as because it's an anime. Fans want and expect the protagonist to be wholly good. Consider this. In one scene, Shiro talks with Mati and suggests that,
もしかしたら自分が正義の味方じゃなくて。
well, how about that? The main character isn't really a hero who does all the right things. What an idea! Again, it's distressing that a lot of people who tout anime for giving more sophisticated things in animation hate the rape scene's existence, thus exposing their shallow reasons for liking anime in the first place. In most cases, we expect a protagonist in this story to improve gradually over time and not take a giant step backwards. Requeenie's remorse comes from a realization that she had to resort to violence to get Shiro off her, to compromise, even though she almost idolized him and his purpose.
たまには神様とも適当に折り合いをつけなきゃ。
適当？
無理するなってことさ。
私無理なんかしてないわ。それにあなたの言う適当な折り合いが世の中をこんな風にしたのよ。
こんなに便利になったさ。
It's in a stark moment like this where realism takes over, where the complexity of the characters reflects the kind of lack of understanding we find between people in our day-to-day lives. Is the scene pleasant? No. Is it challenging? Yes. Hayao Miyazaki, in the aforementioned interview with Yamaga, even points out how well paced and set up it is. In this film, when you've really been paying attention, preferably on a subsequent viewing, seeing this scene in its larger context makes a lot more sense. And so, with this film completed, with the highest budget ever given to an animated film in Japan, the desperate question of how to market this strange beast became a dire concern. In fact, they never did quite figure it out. The marketing department, that is. It seems what they wanted was another Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, but Royal Space Force was harder for them to pin down, as this trailer indicates. They only emphasized the promise of another world, leading people to believe that it would focus more on a fantastic environment. However, it would prove detrimental to the film's success, and it was a success, just not one that Bandai or Gainax had hoped for. Oh, and the matter of the title, Royal Space Force was always intended as the original title, but the marketing had them add the wings of Honneamise to make it seem a bit more fantastic. Of all places, the film actually had its world premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood with an English dub, although this failed to garner a large response. While in Japan, the film was relegated to sharing a double bill with the Ewok adventure. And so, for a time, the promise of more animated films of this kind softly died at the box office. The Royal Space Force really stands alone among anime. True, it looks like many animated films from Japan of the time, but what this tried to accomplish, the mission that Hiroyuki Yamaga had of bringing realistic characters and stories to anime, separates it for sure from its contemporaries. And it's definitely something of an anomaly, especially for Gainax due to the lack of fan service and copious references. Not until films like Patlabor 2, Only Yesterday, the works of Satoshi Kon, and most recently The Wind Rises, would anime again climb to such narrative heights. I'm glad that at least they've given us a handful of animated films that are not only challenging human drama, but also feasts for the eyes. It truly deserves to be elevated as one of the greatest science fiction films of all time. This is Alex Latanzi of The Cinemologist saying, keep watching.
Five, 6, 3, 4, 10, 8.
Marty, what the hell are you steamrolling me for? Oh.
Well, you could still win. Remember, the night's young.